Democracy. A concept that holds immense significance in theory, yet it manifests in varied forms when applied in practice. Across the world today, it is widely celebrated and often presented as the primary solution to political challenges. Despite this widespread acclaim, whether democracy truly fulfills this role remains a matter of ongoing debate. To meaningfully engage with this question, it is necessary to explore the origins of democracy, the pathways through which it spread, and the reasons behind its adaptation in different regions. Equally important is an examination of the outcomes it has produced over time, particularly within the African context. The roots of democracy can be traced back to ancient Greece around 507 BC. The term itself is derived from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and krates, meaning choice or power. In its simplest sense, democracy can therefore be understood as the choice of the people. Under the leadership of Cleisthenes, this concept was institutionalized in ancient Athens through a system that allowed citizens to elect representatives into a governing council, often referred to as the ecclesia or the primary sovereign assembly, tasked with overseeing public affairs. However, despite its innovative nature, democracy in ancient Greece was not universally embraced. Greek philosophers, known for their profound intellectual contributions, expressed differing opinions about the system. One of the most notable critics was Socrates, who questioned the practicality of democracy due to what he perceived as its inherent weaknesses. His concerns centered on the idea that political decision-making was entrusted to a population that, in his view, lacked the necessary intellectual capacity to make informed choices. In Book 6 of Plato's work, Republic, Socrates is portrayed in a discussion with Adeimantus, where the idea of selecting leaders based on popularity is critically examined. Socrates eventually argued that leadership should be based not on popular opinion but on an individual's ability and competence to govern effectively. He maintained that such competence must be grounded in intellectual rigor rather than influenced by external or superficial considerations. Ironically, his own life came to an end in 399 BC through a democratic process, illustrating the very dangers he had warned against. It is also important to recognize that Athenian democracy was highly exclusive. Participation was limited to male citizens, while women and non-citizens were excluded, reflecting the patriarchal structure of that society. In Western societies, democracy did not emerge overnight but developed gradually through a series of historical events that differed across regions. In Europe, particularly in England and France, the foundations of modern democracy began to take shape between the mid-17th and late 18th centuries. Before this transformation, Europe was characterized by a feudal system dominated by monarchies and feudal lords. Authority was centralized, hierarchical, and largely unquestioned, with the monarchy occupying the highest position and wielding absolute power. Under such conditions, the institutional frameworks that define modern democratic systems were largely absent. In England, the transition toward a more democratic system was marked by a prolonged conflict between the monarchy and Parliament, culminating in the English Civil War, which lasted from 1642 to 1651. This struggle ultimately led to significant changes in the distribution of political power. Although King Charles I was executed in 1649, the long-term outcome was not the complete abolition of the monarchy but rather the establishment of a dual system in which Parliament held substantive authority while the monarchy assumed a largely ceremonial role. This arrangement created a balance between tradition and reform, allowing democratic principles to develop without entirely dismantling the existing political structure. A different trajectory unfolded in France. Widespread dissatisfaction among the population, driven in part by shortages of essential goods such as bread, sparked a revolt against the autocratic rule of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. The French Revolution on 14 July 1789 dramatically reshaped the country's political landscape. The monarchy's perceived indifference to the suffering of the people intensified public anger, ultimately leading to its overthrow. In its place, a new political order was established, grounded in the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. This marked the beginning of France's transition toward democratic governance. Despite their differences, both the English and French experiences shared a common outcome: the empowerment of the people to influence how they were governed. Across the Atlantic, the United States of America emerged as another significant example in the evolution of democracy. Initially formed through settlements established by Dutch and English migrants, the region later came under British colonial control. Although the continent had been explored earlier by Christopher Columbus in 1492, significant European settlement began in the early 17th century. Many settlers arrived seeking relief from religious persecution, only to find themselves under another form of authority imposed by the British Crown. As the population of the colonies grew, tensions between the settlers and British authorities intensified. Key grievances included restrictive governance and taxation policies imposed to support Britain's military engagements in Europe. By the mid-18th century, calls for greater autonomy had become widespread. These tensions eventually culminated in the American Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776, which formally severed ties with Britain. The ensuing American War of Independence, fought between 1776 and 1783 under the leadership of George Washington, secured the colony's independence. Following independence, efforts were made to establish a stable political system. In 1787, a constitutional convention convened in Philadelphia to address the weaknesses of the existing framework, resulting in the creation of the United States Constitution. Shortly thereafter, the First Federal Congress was established in 1789. Despite these advancements, the young nation faced numerous challenges, including continued conflicts with Britain, such as the War of 1812. Nevertheless, democratic ideals continued to evolve, particularly during the era known as Jacksonian democracy, which emphasized broader political participation. While democracy was taking root in Europe and America, a different process was unfolding in Africa. The late 19th century saw the beginning of the scramble for Africa, during which European powers divided the continent among themselves. Although these powers brought with them governance systems rooted in democratic principles, they did not implement democracy in practice within their colonies. Instead, authoritarian rule prevailed. Nevertheless, exposure to these systems created expectations among Africans for fair and representative governance after independence. The year 1960, ushered in what is often referred to as the African Decade, independence movements had gained momentum across the continent. The departure of colonial powers, anticipated in part by Harold Macmillan's Winds of Change speech, ushered in a new era of self-governance. Initially, many African countries retained the administrative and political structures established during colonial rule. In some cases, such as Kenya and later Zimbabwe, remnants of colonial influence remained within governance systems, providing a degree of continuity. However, matters would change as indigenization policies became entrenched in African government decision-making processes. As it became evident that their racial identity was largely at odds with government policy, much of which was framed to blame the escalating challenges in African countries on colonialists, many felt excluded and chose to resign from their positions in government. Gradually, the political, constitutional and administrative structures that the colonialists left began to crumble, thereby ushering in a new age of suffering for the citizens of their respective countries. Yet, the system had been designed to garner support from the very people being oppressed, although being oblivious to their plight. Universal suffrage had been extended to Africans shortly before independence as a precursor to the formation of the first post-independence governments. It was expected to be the future standard for government formations in the continent as many of the new nations were urged to follow democratic models of government. But democracy in Africa differed from that practiced in the rest of the world. Judging by Western standards today, democracies in Africa, or what remains of them, flounder owing to the deliberate actions of African politicians. As is expected in every country professing to be democratic across the globe, the ascension to office must be preceded by political campaigns which are followed by elections. During this period, promises are made, many of which are directed to the identification and addressing of the people's basic needs. That is, the provision of water, the construction of schools, hospitals and roads amongst other things. Those are exactly the things the people want to hear during election campaigns. It is music to their ears. Thus, it is never surprising to see presidential candidates across the continent traversing their respective countries in solicitation of votes and being warmly welcomed with song and dance, even in the remotest villages of their countries. Significant public resources are often directed toward appeasing the population, including producing T-shirts bearing the images of presidential candidates and distributing food parcels. Such practices are commonly observed in governments led by liberation movements across the continent. Despite these initiatives, the funfair is short-lived, as the realities of incapable leadership take hold. With the passage of time, African voters realize that the wheels of government turn slowly as their expectations are often bogged down and frustrated by bureaucratic red tape, the misappropriation of public funds as well as corruption. Nevertheless, the population remains as hopeful as it is patient, even though it unsuspectingly knows that the deception will be repackaged and reapplied by the same politicians who hope to secure second, third or even fifth terms in office. That, therefore, explains why many African presidents have clung to power for decades and show no signs of leaving anytime soon. As a result, to ease doubts and divert attention from political and economic challenges, African politicians consistently strive to convince the public that they remain committed to delivering on their promises. Once in a while, they appear in the media as guests in specially created current affairs shows, to regurgitate stale electoral promises. Yet nothing tangible gets done thereafter. Added to this, is the problem of tribalism, where those in power often find themselves under pressure to elevate the status of their tribesmen who must eat, as there is that perception among Africans generally. To the African, political power equates to personal financial gain. It is a means to an end. From cold drink and itjarjo in South Africa to kitu kidogo and chai in East Africa to agunje in Nigeria, as well as gasolina in Portuguese-speaking African countries, these expressions have become part of the everyday vocabulary used by corrupt government officials to solicit bribes in return for providing public services. This trend is common throughout Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, and is endemic in the civil service. Consequently, many tribesmen of those in leadership often get pushed up the proverbial political ladder under the basis of appeasement by those at the helm of power. In essence, the system of meritocracy which the colonialists had established prior to independence and which subsisted in the first 5 or 10 years after independence, gradually gets eroded. In its place is tribalism, which leads to gross incompetence in public service. With time, other practices also creep in. A head of state is considered the center of power and institutions become subservient to his authority. Under such a setup, other social practices which would be frowned upon in the Western world develop. These include cronyism and sycophancy. As a result, the exercise of governmental duties comes to resemble a social circle, where associates act in concert while safeguarding one another from scrutiny and legal consequences. Appointments to civil service positions are determined not by merit or qualifications, but by allegiance to a political party. Sycophants emerge and quickly multiply. They discharge with devotion their odd tasks of flattering the president with praise whilst also chanting party slogans is a sign of grossly misguided loyalty. Unfortunately, all that takes place amidst gradual economic decline. In such societies, what is commonly informally referred to as politics of the stomach takes preeminence, that is, the acceptance of the status quo as long as personal bank accounts of government loyalists are filled with taxpayers' money. Worse still, the separation of powers as envisaged by French jurist Montesquieu does not take place. Often, whether ignorantly or intentionally, members of the executive branch of government meddle in the affairs of parliament and even the judiciary. Constitutions become reduced to meaningless documents as accountability before established constitutional bodies hardly takes place. When accountability is demanded, many politicians interpret it as a personal affront, often reacting with public tirades or, in some cases, resorting to forceful measures against opponents, including the use of criminal elements. A case in point was the mysterious disappearance and subsequent murder of Kenyan politician J.M. Kariuki in March 1975, who was vocal against the corrupt activities taking place in President Jomo Kenyatta's government. Although the perpetrators were identified by a select parliamentary committee as senior police and administrative officials, the case was never solved conclusively, leaving the people of Kenya with many unanswered questions to this day. Ultimately, efforts to hold government officials responsible for their conduct in Africa are frequently abandoned altogether. What is saddening is that with time, such practices not only become deeply entrenched into African societies but become accepted as normal. After 4 or 5 years, depending on constitutional dictates regarding the holding of elections, politicians return to the same people, with the same promises in order to disappoint the same people in a similar or worse manner. And so the cycle repeats itself. This, then, begs the question: why do African democracies perform worse than their American, Asian and European counterparts? What could be the underlying causes for this existence? The answer may be stated as primarily being one of society's evolution. Whenever societies remain backward in terms of development, people fail to understand the mechanics of concepts such as democracy and the benefits they carry. Unfortunately, sub-Saharan African societies fall into this category. For democracy to flourish, it requires a solid economic base that reinforces values such as accountability and sound administrative integrity, among other things. Many African countries unfortunately wrestle with poverty and other economic hardships. Therefore, when political opportunities arise, the focus is first placed on personal enrichment before national service. Thus, a politician will find it difficult not to embezzle government funds whilst in office, as he or she knows that the seat of power might be taken away either by revolution or in a subsequent election. A recent example is that of former South African President Jacob Zuma, whose actions significantly drained public funds, approximately $20 million, around 246 million rand at the time, to construct a private residence in Nkandla in 2013. In fact, under his regime, the culture of largesse was permitted with impunity, resulting in dire economic consequences for the country, some of which the country continues to grapple with to this day. The South African case is quite disappointing because she was the last country on the continent to gain liberation, yet her black leaders since 1994 either failed or refused to learn the lessons of the past political and economic ills which had befallen the rest of Africa. Today, every bureaucracy in South Africa is awash with corrupt activities, and commissions of inquiry are instituted now and again with hardly any public reports or recommendations. In simple terms, matters just fizzle away from public scrutiny. In 2024, the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or the OCCRP, named Kenyan President William Ruto and Nigerian President Bola Tinubu as the most corrupt heads of state on the continent. Ruto's first 6 months in office witnessed the spending of approximately $11 million on receptions, parties and hospitality supplies. He had also been accused of spending large sums of state funds on chartered planes for trips abroad. Bola Tinubu has also faced allegations of accumulating significant wealth for his family and undertaking costly foreign trips. Soon after his inauguration, he was further accused of certificate forgery due to inconsistencies in the academic credentials he submitted to Independent National Electoral Commission ahead of the 2023 general elections. These developments unfolded at a time when young people were protesting economic hardships in their countries, with demonstrations in Kenya reportedly more intense than those in Nigeria. To curb these ongoing problems on the continent, it has been argued by some that the advancement of education will be the solution to such political tendencies. However, such arguments fail to appreciate the structure of African education systems, that they are premised on job seeking, as opposed to entrepreneurship. This helps explain the migration of skilled individuals from Africa to Europe and other developed regions. Consequently, the continent's limited development significantly contributes to the weaknesses observed in its democratic systems. For instance, as of 2025, Africa's gross domestic product, GDP, was approximately $2.8 trillion. An amount lower than that of a single European nation such as France or the United Kingdom. Due to sluggish economic growth, poverty continues to be widespread across the continent, largely driven by a shortage of employment opportunities in many countries, along with the political challenges that accompany these conditions. Ultimately, the effectiveness of democracy is closely linked to broader societal conditions. In regions where economic development has progressed, democratic systems tend to function more effectively, supported by transparency and accountability. In contrast, where development remains limited, democratic institutions often struggle to deliver on their promises. This disparity helps explain the challenges faced by many African democracies and underscores the importance of economic transformation as a foundation for sustainable governance. With that in mind, what do you think? Are you satisfied with the current state of democracy in Africa? Have you come to accept the situation many Africans face under these systems of governance? Or do you still hold on to hope that change is possible in the future? Please let us know in the comments section. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe for more insightful content. Also hit the notification button so that you are notified of new uploads. Thank you for watching.